Good evening. Welcome to the Hastings Public Library here in Pasadena. Thank you to Diane Walker for having us and hosting us tonight. She's the director of the library here. Thank you. You know what? It's always a privilege to meet someone that actually helps you kind of elevate what you do. And so tonight I'm presenting Susana Porras, who's actually allowed me to be the publisher of her first, or not her first book, her second, third book, but and I'm happy to introduce her to share with us Danny's Trails. So, Susana Porras.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Susana Porras, and I am the author of Danny's Trails, Mossley, England. I was born and raised here in the beautiful city of Pasadena, California, but my family is originally from Guatemala. I am a sociologist by trade, so I did a lot of research-based writing for many years, and I didn't really discover that writing could be fun until much later. So I began writing in 2009, and I thoroughly enjoy blogging and writing for a small local newspaper and writing books. And Danny's Trails is actually my third book, but it is my first children's book. I largely consider myself an adult nonfiction writer. I love to write about what I see, how I feel, my experiences. And so writing a children's book in British English about a place that I've never been to before was a little bit of a challenge. So I'm going to tell you a little bit today of how this journey came to be and how it's all related to Stroke Awareness Month. Okay, thank you. And so in 2015, I was making my way back home from a trip that I took to Paris by way of London Heathrow. And it had taken me most of the day to get there. And by the time I got there, I was pretty tired. And I checked in, and I fell asleep on the main lounge. And when I woke up, I realized I was about to miss my plane. And so I made a mad dash across one of London's largest airports, and I barely made it across the threshold, and made that long, dreaded walk down the center aisle, past the wings, to my economy seat that was waiting for me all the way in the back. And when I arrived there, there was a young man that was placing his items in the overhead compartment bin. And he looks over at me, and he wasn't fazed at all by my disheveled appearance. And he says to me, "May I help you with your bag?" And I was taken aback a little bit, but I accepted his offer, and he placed my items in the overhead compartment bin. And we proceeded to have a seat. We didn't talk very much after that. But being the sociologist that I am, I observed him the entire time. And I watched how he interacted with the other passengers and the crew and how courteous he was. And there was just something about him, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And so then I finally, a couple of hours before we land, I strike up a conversation with him. And as it turns out, he's on his way to LA to do a big road trip with his girlfriend, right? And they're going to go through California and through Nevada. And the conversation gets really good, and I want to know all about it. And then we land. And so I want to keep this conversation going, and so I invite them over to my house for dinner. And about a month later, they show up at my doorstep. And we continue our conversation, and we share a nice meal. I give him a tour of the beautiful city of Pasadena. And Danny and I discovered that we have a lot more in common. You know, we have this kind of spontaneous, adventurous spirit, and we're both always constantly looking for authentic experiences. And so we had a nice visit, and then they took off, right? They left. And Danny and I continued to stay in contact, and we became good friends. But actually, more than friends, we actually kind of became these friendly rivals of sort. And so we got into this competition of who was doing the cooler thing, right? And so we were constantly texting each other what we were doing. And this was before either of us had gotten into Instagram. But it always seemed like Danny was always doing something way cooler than I was, right? He was always off at some rave in central London, or checking out some really cool fast cars and with his friends. Or he was off on some beautiful mountain overlooking the most breathtaking sunset. And so I did get to see Danny a few more times after that. And he actually came back to LA a couple more times without the girlfriend. She was a little bit boring. And my dad and I actually took a trip down to York, England in 2017, and we had a chance to visit with him and his aunt and his uncle. And we had a really nice visit, and it was on that trip that I first introduced my dad to the Camino de Santiago. And if you're not familiar with the Camino, it's this 1,000-year-old pilgrimage where pilgrims today still walk 500 miles across northern Spain, right, starting from the base of the Pyrenees Mountains. And at the time, my dad was 72 years old and wanted to know nothing about the Camino, right? He didn't want to walk no 500 miles. And so, but I guess something clicked during that trip, and when we got home, he said that he wanted to go on Camino the following year. And as soon as he said that, I realized a couple of things. One, that we certainly didn't have enough time to plan for something like that. You need at least 1 year to plan for the Camino, and we only had 9 months. And I also realized that I was probably going to have to quit my job because no job was going to let me go for 5 weeks, right? But I also knew if I did the Camino, it was going to outdo anything that Danny had ever done, right? And so I told my dad right away, I'm like, yeah, let's go on Camino, right? So the very next day, I go to text Danny, and I'm like, Danny, guess what? No response. And that was very rare for Danny because even though we were 8 hours apart, if it had to do with travel or adventure, he would respond right away. And that time he didn't. But he had lost his phone on a previous trip. And so I thought, he probably lost his phone again. And as soon as he finds his phone, he's going to give me a call or a text. About a month later, I get a call from an unknown number from England. And when I go to answer the phone, it's a woman. And at first I thought, why is Danny's girlfriend calling me, right? It wasn't Danny's girlfriend. It was actually his mom. I had never met his mom. I had never spoken to his mom. And when a mom calls, it's something serious, right? And so I took a deep breath, and she proceeds to tell me that Danny had an accident which led to a major stroke. And then when he woke up, he was unable to walk, talk, read, write, or even feed himself. But somehow he had managed to communicate to his mom that he had to answer the text message from me. That's why she was calling me. And I can't imagine, what he was going through at the time. And for me to even think about it, he was someone who was 10 years younger than I was. And, he was someone who really lived life to the fullest. And so, and I had really gotten to know Danny like the marathon runner and the music aficionado and, just the globetrotter, the hiker, surfer, kayaker. He was really active, and for this to happen to him was really, really tragic. The person I hadn't gotten to know was Danny the fighter. And he came out of this swinging. He wasn't going to let this, keep him down. And little by little, he started taking his first steps and saying his first words and even moving back on his own in his flat by himself. And so he's really been this really big inspiration to me. And so by May of 2019, my dad and I had this bucket list trip planned to go to the Monaco Grand Prix. And my dad wasn't able to go, and I called up Danny. And before I could finish asking the question, he shouts out an enthusiastic yes, right? He's like, he wants to go see the car races, right? And it's that spontaneity that is very rare in people, right? Most people, if I would have said, hey, you want to go to the Monaco Grand Prix? They would have asked me, when are we going? How long are we staying? Where are we staying? What's the itinerary? They would have asked me 101 questions, and then they would have said, well, maybe next time, right? Danny is one of those people that says yes first and asks questions later, right? And so it's very rare to find people like that. And so in May of 2019, Dan and I meet up in Nice, France. And this is the first time that I'm seeing him in 2 years after the accident. And for anyone who's ever been through something like this, a loved one who's gotten, ill, and you're having to see them, for the first time in the current state, it can be pretty difficult. And Danny couldn't walk or talk as fast as he once did, right? But he still had that same charm, that same charisma, that same sense of humor, and that same love of life that he always did, right? And so the first thing we do, we go off to watch the races, and the first thing he does, makes a new friend, right, on the bleachers of the Monaco Grand Prix. And we meet this jet setter from New York, and this gentleman had arrived in Monaco on a helicopter, and he had already watched the races from the yachts, and he was riding around with a private chauffeur. But more extraordinary, he treated us like we were old friends. And we ended up spending the next 3 days together. And he took us to the casino, and he treated us for dinner at the Hotel de Paris in Monte Carlo. And we just had this really amazing time. I don't even remember the last time I laughed so hard. And then when it was all said and done, we agreed to do it all over again, right? We're going to have, another trip like this. Famous last words, right? What happens after that? COVID, right? Now the entire world is in complete lockdown, and nobody is traveling. Nobody is traveling except for Danny, Ron, and myself. And I'll tell you how we did this. So I did end up doing that trip with my dad in 2018. We did go on the Camino. And I documented that trip in the form of a diary. And every single day I wrote a sonnet. So by the end of the trip, I had 39 sonnets. And when I came home, I got the poems and I shelved them, and I never looked at them again. And a good friend of mine said to me during COVID, she's like, you should really get those poems and share them with your friends and family for the holidays. And the reason she said that was because we didn't know if we were going to have jobs, right? And I thought, well, that'll be a cheap way to give everybody a present, right? And so I thought it was a fantastic idea. So I spent the next year of COVID reviewing and rewriting and reliving the Camino. And it's really incredible how your mind works, right? And so, if you can see it, you can feel it. And so I spent a year during COVID actually walking the Camino because I was living it every single day. And Ron and Danny were doing basically the same thing. And so Ron had gotten, hold of all of his old pictures and all the videos that he had done from his previous trips, and he began posting them on social media. And Danny and I are watching this, and it almost made us feel like he really was traveling. We knew he wasn't, but it kind of almost made us feel like he was, right? And Danny got tired of watching TV one day, and he turns off the boob tube. He picks up a pencil, and he begins doing something that he's never done before. And he begins to draw. And he's pretty prolific at that. He begins sending me pictures of all of his drawings. And he's drawing pictures of all of his previous trips, New York and San Francisco and Vegas, and sending me all these pictures. And at first, I'm really not paying much attention to them. But one day, he sends me this drawing. And it was this drawing of a giraffe, sticking his head in his neighbor's window, right? And I just thought it was the cutest thing, right? Isn't that cute? And so I picked up the phone, and I said, hey, Danny, I said, how would you feel about me writing a book based on your illustrations? And he laughs. He was like, yeah, sure, go for it, And I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I said, give me a few months, and I'll come down to England, and I'll spend 3 weeks out there, and I'll help you write a book, right? And I hung up the phone. And as soon as I hang up the phone, I thought, I am not going to be able to write a book in 3 weeks, right? And so I thought I better at least get started. And another caveat to that was that I needed to write something that was relevant for Danny. Because remember, he hasn't learned how to read yet, right? He's still in the process of relearning how to read. And so I couldn't write a book about Pinky, the purple polka-dotted elephant or something, right? I needed to write something that was going to be dignified enough for someone like him to be proud of reading, right? And so I spent the next few months sorting through pictures and doing some research and going through Google Maps. And I was actually working backwards because I guess most children's authors, and actually learning how to write a children's book, right? And most children's book authors actually write a book and then hire an illustrator and then have them draw the book, right? And so I'm having to write a story based on what he already gave me, right? And so by January of 2023, I was ready. So I fly out there. And I meet Danny and his cousin Mikey in a pub in London. And since it was just after Christmas, we both had Christmas presents for each other. And I had wrapped up the drafts of this book for him to open up. And for those of you who don't know me, I tend to write books for people that I love, and I don't tell them that I wrote it. So I surprised Danny with this book, right? And he was completely in shock and overjoyed that he had this book, and he was looking at his illustrations come to life in this book, right? What I hadn't taken into account was that I had spent such a long time putting this book together was the impact that it was going to have on him and his family, right? And I think Mikey said it best, and I wish I could have recorded what he said, and I'm going to give you the very watered-down version. It had been 6 years from the time of the stroke to the time that we were sitting in there in that pub. And Mikey says, wow, finally something good has come out of all of this, right? And it's been such an uplifting thing, not just for Danny, not just for his family, but for me as well, right? It's been kind of brought us some closure to everything that's happened all of these years, right? And so, in closing, I'd like to say that, I am an adult nonfiction writer. I wrote this book for an adult friend of mine, and it is loosely based on a true story. It's about a young man who loves to draw, and he dreams about traveling and seeing the world, but finds all of the venture he's looking for in 6.2-mile hike right there in his own backyard. And so that's how Danny's Trails came to be. Okay. So, and one last thing that I forgot to mention was that when we were exchanging gifts in that pub, was that he had made something for me too, and so he drew a picture of my house. So it's amazing how much of a gift you can give someone with just a pencil, right? And so, I gave him a book that was written with a pencil, and he gave me a drawing that was, created with a pencil, okay? And so, yeah. So thank you so much. And so we do have some prizes here, but that I'd like to raffle off. But before I do that, does anybody here have any questions? Danny's doing very well. He's had a remarkable recovery. This happened when he was 28 years old, so if you can imagine. He was very young. And he's actually, in a couple of days, he's going off to Turkey, and he's going to be in Turkey for a whole month. So he's doing extraordinarily well. And he plans on visiting the U.S. in 2026. Yes, but he still has a lot of trouble with his speech. So especially when he gets nervous or frustrated, it takes him a little bit longer to communicate. I think it's easier when there's people that he knows, and it's easier for him to communicate. And actually, Bob is an author himself. He authored a couple of books after his stroke, and he did the blurb for Danny's Trails. Wow. Yeah. So... And I actually have some of my globe-trotting friends here in the audience. We have Simon Lackey, who's a world traveler. I believe he's, how many languages? 5 languages? He speaks 5 languages. Up-and-coming author as well. We have Victor Cast right here, world traveler as well. 2 languages. I'm up to 2 languages right now. One of them is Chinese, by the way. Not only up-and-coming author, but already an author. He's written many books already. So, and then we also have a documentarian, Mike Costa here, world traveler. 1.5 languages. 1.5 languages. And I really enjoy seeing my friends. Actually, the funny thing was that every time I travel, I always bump into my friends around. And when I travel with my dad, actually, and that's my dad right here, my globetrotting dad right there. And we'll arrive somewhere, and I'll surprise him. I'm like, with somebody. He's like, "How do you know these people?" So the last time I saw Simon was in Frankfurt, Germany, and I saw Mike over in Paris when we were up and about. So yeah, that was one of the reasons I wanted to do the book. because I wanted him to have something to be able to promote his art and showcase it, especially in a place like England. I mean, there are art galleries galore. So there's no shortage of places where he can actually display his art and sell his art. So I'm hoping that with the distribution of this book, he'll have a much better platform to be able to do that. You know, it's been very interesting observing him this whole entire time, especially because I knew him from before. His memory hasn't been affected, so he remembers everything, and everything that he did, all of his previous trips and things. The one thing that changed a little bit was his behavior. So he's going to kill me for saying this, but the last time I saw him, I said, Danny, I hope you really don't take offense to this. But before you had the stroke, you were kind of a slob, and now he is like a neat freak, right? If you use one of his cups, he like washes it and puts it away, right? And so he's very neat about everything. He has everything in order, and he definitely wasn't like that before. And so, and the funny thing is that I did talk to a doctor about it just a couple of weeks ago, and he says that usually the opposite happens. And so, but no, he's very neat and meticulous about everything nowadays. Yes, yeah. But yeah, he still enjoys hiking. He's, I hope you follow him on Instagram. He's at Dan Van Maken on Instagram. I can give you that a little bit later. But yeah, he's always out and about. He's always hiking. He's always off on the first adventure he can get his hands on. And he's going to be going all through Turkey in the next couple of days. So I'm sure that he's going to be drawing a lot. He really enjoys it. Oh, and by the way, Victor Cass is also an artist as well. So he does a lot of. So I have a lot of artistic friends. So, but I'm really hoping that he. Really continues with his artwork. He really enjoys it. What I find amazing is that he never drew before, so it's another change in behavior. So I never knew him to draw at all before this happened. Yeah. He colored pencils. Mm-hmm. Colored pencils. He's done a little bit of watercolors, but mostly colored pencils. Yeah. He really enjoys that. So, it's definitely been a journey, and so this backyard hike that he did, during COVID, he really had nowhere to go, right? So he started going to all of the places that were basically in his town. So the book highlights all of these places that he stopped in, and so it's a real 6.2 mile hike. So if you go down, you can stop by and visit Danny, say hello, and then go on this hike. I did eventually do it myself, because I had to do it all remotely. I had never been there, and so when I went down there in 2023, we actually did do the walk, and I verified that all the information that I had written on was correct. And so so it was a long hike. 6.2 miles is a doozy. So it took us most of the day to do it, and by the time we finished, it was dark. Yeah, and actually some of the pictures up here, so when you get a chance and you come up, you can see the places in real life, what they look like, from the book to the actual pictures. And so again, there's books if you would like to purchase one, and the slideshow is up here if you'd like to get a closer look at it, okay? Thank you, everybody.